Thank you very much indeed, Matthias. As we follow the alphabetical order of speakers, it's the turn of tea next. And as they say in English, last but not least, or we say in Arabic, khitamuha misk, sealed by musk. Sounds better in Arabic, I guess. It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Taha Özhan. He is from Turkey, the head of the Foreign Relations Committee of the Grand Assembly of Turkey, which means the Turkish Parliament for us English speakers. He is currently also a senior advisor to the Prime Minister of Turkey. And I should mention also, a man is not far from the pen and the book as a former president of the SETA Foundation, one of the region's leading institutional think tanks headquartered in Ankara with offices everywhere from Washington, D.C. to Cairo. So let's extend a warm hand and ask him to address us.
Thank you. Thank you for this warm introduction. And I also want to, again, thanks to Spanish Hospitality and Common Action Forum leadership and the organizers for this very important and timely meeting. When I got the invitation, I mean, the title is already huge. I thought, it's better to talk about global structural crisis, because what we're having through is not a temporary thing, but rather it is a global structural crisis. Last decade of last century had become the most important jubilee or crown period for the West and the North, especially both in political and economic terms. The victory declared, they were put on record as the most colorful years of global capitalism. That's been criticized that those colors may also be the colors of autumn, which is also beautiful. But at the end, why should not they? For the North, the liberal democracy had almost announced its global victory in political terms. The Cold War was finally ended. Broadest military coalition was successfully tested during the occupation of Iraq after the post-World War II period. The global financial system was set up. Regional economic alliances were set up like European Union, and it was successful. And the communication revolution was experienced once again. The end of history was announced for the non-West. With the start of the new millennium, the neoliberal approach triumphantly announced to us that there was a now borderless and perhaps limitless global playing field. However, it is not a realistic goal to take advantage of new opportunities and fix global structural crisis without addressing ailments that lie at the foundation of this structure in the first place. Although global capitalism definition of property, capital, and free flow of labor may sound cliché, but many believe that capitalism had been practiced in real life as much as it fit the economic and political gain axis of North. However, the fact that global free circulation was not realized as it is expected, and the first tensions within the World Trade Organization, later by the global financial crisis. Despite all these problems in the system, however, it is important to note that global circulation happened at a certain extent and it affected globally everybody. At the global level, we have been experiencing a transition period at least since the beginning of current millennium. The political economic ruptures that give rise to this assessment have become entirely visible now. After 1990s, which marked the best years of capitalism in the North, the world witnessed the rise of cycle of structural crisis in various disguises. Today, there are at least two factors that could break this vicious cycle. The first relates to undeclared economic tensions between North and the South, as well as their impact on the future costs that modern world will have to bear. The second deals with the updating supposedly global institutions built in the post-World War II period. The first tension, it was apparent, and it happened rapidly last 7 to 8 years. I mean, if you check out the early 2000 reports, all kinds of global institutions, there is a hierarchy and listing of the power, let's say, the economic power, next quarter century or half a century, rapidly changed in 5 to 7 years. And that list continued to change, and who's going to be first 10 powerful, 20 powerful economies in the world is a very crucial question, and it is the main source of the tension. That list is becoming upside down. It doesn't mean quality of capital is becoming upside down. Still, North holds the quality of capital, but the accumulation of capital is really creating a huge stress. To be fair, both issues have been on the global agenda for quite some time now. After 2001, however, rapid political and economic ruptures triggered fears about the debt crisis, the depth of the crisis. Particularly, the political repercussions of the 9/11 invasions and the transformation of 2008 fiscal crisis into a full-blown global recession led to major revisions about the observers' expectations of the 21st century. At this point, the world is experiencing a shortage of global institutions able to show economic and political leadership to push the global vision toward and step in at times of crisis. The driving force behind this phenomenon, of course, is that the post-World War II order, which reflects the circumstances of a bygone century, has ceased to be credible. In order to overcome present challenges, North first needs to make its peace with the accumulation of capital in the South, which has caused tensions in previous years. This, in turn, means that we will witness a diversification of actors in the 20th century of capitalist world system and subsequently major geopolitical impacts thereof. This is not merely a projection but realistic assessment of whose validity is reaffirmed each passing year, and in order to alter this course, certain actors who had thus far been reluctant to say anything but no boots on the ground will have to be willing to bear huge costs. After all, stopping South's capitalist expansion won't be possible unless current network of global dependencies is fundamentally challenged. This, in turn, would mean the end of all present connections between production and financing, which does not look viable in foreseeable future. At the same time, political crises that were assumed to be outside the realm of economic political debate entered into the circulation. In fact, this was not an area of problems that were not predicted by the system. There were many analyses indicating new spikes of crisis in the wake of Afghanistan and Iraq invasions following 9/11. These analyses were to large extent findings rather than solution-oriented proposals to fix structural problems, thus suggesting a new political apathy. Nevertheless, they did define elements of the political crisis in the new millennium. At the top of the list were states' so-called weak links and the problem of how to manage global impact of crisis-ridden regions. These analyses were pretty serious and consistent, but their recommendations were obscure and unhelpful. Broadly, it was noted that the nation-states in the global north had not entered into conventional wars since World War II, and that new threats would come from the spread of crisis caused by the weak states. That's understood, but in this sense, it was clear that no political crisis, civil war, interstate wars would concern only the main actors of the conflicts, but it could create regional tsunamis and global impacts. This situation, as in the domino effect of Arab Spring, increased potential transfer of crisis between ecosystems, rather than simply travel of crisis in a single region to another ecosystem. In other words, the location that crisis first emerged becomes simply the first step of the crisis and infects other regions and globally as well. The current crisis will most likely be treated as to isolate it in a security-oriented perspective, or it will be done through structural intervention so as to democratize global capital of the North, which would help update global institutions and pave the way for rendering them more egalitarian. The choice to make between these two will determine the degree of the impact of the next crisis. So it is structural. Above all these crises we have been experiencing, the bigger and more current issue we are facing is political apathy of those who hold the economic and military power globally. Tragically and perhaps dangerously, we are confronted with a deep lack of global political apathy. This situation renders meaningless or more meaningless of the international and regional institutions such as UN, NATO, WTO, and dead ends in EU. The tools for interventions in the global crisis are also disappearing. We are experiencing an unannounced global nihilism. The capacity to solve problems of the postmodern age is almost totally gone. In this vein, Syrian crisis is the most bitter example. The demand for change in Syria was interpreted as a threat by the global political apathy. Status quo was preferred because of the fear that change in Syria would destroy the established regional order and it will inflict global order. If the Syrian uprising had not been suppressed by regional and global actors directly and indirectly by supporting Ba'athist regime, today we were going to talking about whether Gulf states could be transformed into constitutional monarchies or not. We will be talking about improvement of participatory or democracy instead of sectarianism in Iraq. In Egypt, we will be talking about normalization pains of the democracy. Alas, we cannot, because the demand for change in the Arab world suppressed and stopped in Syria. This was, of course, not a result of regional crisis only. It was a product of global political apathy that contributed to the growth of the vicious cycle in Syria. The current system, which created balance between global disparities, simply remains unsustainable. I think we have two ways in front of us. First, we will continue to see dragging into the tragic death of the politics. Second, we will revive the politics. Revival of politics will create platform to re-emergence of the vision, intervention, constructive intervention, and the politics itself. In other words, we are standing between global political nihilism and global political opening, and the choice is ours. Thank you.